Hi! Welcome back to Stories of Light, Dawning Star. To those of you who haven't watched or listened to the first episode, you don't have to have watched it to understand this episode, but we do highly recommend it since we talked about COVID-19 and the effects on mental health in America.
Exactly. Like Steven said, COVID-19 has taken a huge toll on America's mental health. However, this pandemic has also been a huge factor in the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes. In this episode, we'll investigate deeper into the long-rooted history of Asian Americans and recent AAPI hate crimes. We'll also look into what continues to stifle Asian hate, such as the concept of a special foreigner, model minority myth, which we all know, racial triangulation, and end with COVID-19 and the AAPI hate has affected Asian businesses and individual mental health overall.
Truth is, there has been a surge of prejudice and racial hate crimes since the start of COVID-19 within America since February. Recent research at Center for Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, San Bernardino, published that compared to the first quarter of 2020, there has been a historic jump in hate crimes in 2021 across 15 major US cities. So why the sharp increase? What did Asians do so wrong to peak this violence? The answer is nothing. And even if an individual did something wrong, their actions do not reflect a characteristic of a whole racial group. However, there is a connection between the increase of xenophobia and the convenient rhetoric that Chinese is to blame for the spread of COVID-19. In the midst of chaos, some people want a clear reason for why they're suffering. And it's easy to scapegoat a minority group, especially an Asian population like Chinese, that carries a stereotype of being submissive, quiet, etc. It also connects at the yellow peril and the model minority myth, but we'll get into that a little later.
A big example of what contributes to the scapegoating would be the Trump effect. Words can carry consequences, and when powerful individuals use them, it can carry significant consequences on people. Social pressure can change, and when social pressure shifts to allow prejudice and racial behaviors to occur, it can bring devastating effects towards people like Asians. Trump's racial narrative concerning COVID-19 has influenced Americans, biased ones, to behave in more prejudiced and biased actions. So when political leaders do nothing to alleviate or stop Trump's rhetoric, it continues to escalate the violence and harm towards the AAPI community. For instance, Stop AAPI Hate has stated that President Trump's racist and prejudiced actions or tweets in Twitter, which by the way have amassed about 1,213,700 retweets, which wow,
So many.
and 4,276,200 likes, is the biggest voice in spreading the anti-Asian hate rhetoric in connection to COVID-19 among politician leaders. In 2020, 64% registered voters, and of those population, 86% Republicans answered that China was responsible for the pandemic. It is no coincidence that out of the API individuals who report discrimination to Stop AAPI Hate, 43% of them were Chinese, followed by Koreans and Filipinos.
From March 2020 to March 2021, Stop AAPI Hate reported 6,603 Asian hate incidents. The first reported number was 3,395, but over the course of approximately 2 months, retroactive reports increased significantly. The number continues to grow. The most common places where Asian racial hate crimes occur were in public streets and parks, then businesses, followed by online and private homes. Women took 64.8% of the percentage, more than twice the rate in men. The most common type of discrimination was verbal harassment with 65.2%, shunning with 18.1%, and physical assault with 12.6%. When you put it in percentage, it's kind of hard to feel the severity, but when you calculate the number of reported times the percentage, it equals to about 830 physical cases alone.
Incidents like the realization of a 65-year-old woman in the streets of New York City, as bystanders did nothing to stop the violence and harassment from attack, or racially motivated hate patterns are seen throughout America. The tragedy in Atlanta during March shows how racism and sexism can interconnect with each other and bring horrible consequences towards Asians and Asian Americans. 8 lives were lost during that day, and 6 were Asian women. The underlying issue is the fact that racism and the hypersexualization of Asian women in America continue to harm the AAPI community in devastating ways. The attacker even said that he wanted to limit the temptations in front of him, so he purposely targeted Asian-owned spas to execute his beliefs. Statements such as the attacker was having a really bad day are negligent and veiled excuses that do nothing to point towards the real problem. Even in the 21st century, legacies of the yellow fever and its influence in the hypersexualization of Asian women continue to live on.
We'd have to talk about the history of hypersexualization in Asian women to fully understand the context. So let's start from the stereotype of Asian again. So what are they again? Yup, subservient, quiet, and for Asian women especially, exotic and hypersexual. The fetishization and objectification of Asian women root all the way back to at least from late 1800s. What one may call the Gilded Age. If you can't exactly remember what that is, I'll just hint that it was around the time of California Gold Rush. Under the rapid economic growth, America was seen as a land of opportunity, and a large influx of immigrants began to come in as a result. Asians grabbed the opportunity for a chance for a better life. As a result, America had encountered a large body of Asians in their homeland.
However, as the world did suggest, quoting historian Neil Irvin Painter, America has shiny exterior and the rot underneath. Following Orientalism in the Western art and literature, such as Madame Christmas, which would later be adopted as the opera Madame Butterfly, Asian women were already seen under the lens of objectification and lust. In the fear that the Asian immigrants were taking American jobs, xenophobic comics were distributing, and Asian women were profiled as prostitutes and accused of being unclean and spreading STDs. Combined with the doll-like objectification came the birth of shocking acts such as the Page Act of 1875, which banned laborers from China, Japan, or any Oriental country entering the country for lewd and immoral purposes, and it was mostly used for prohibiting Chinese women from entering the country. Of course, soon came the famous 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which implicitly targeted the immigration and nationalization of Chinese people for 10 years.
Then came the 1900s, the era of war and military. Under the military culture, gambling, drinking, and going to the brothels were a norm and even sometimes seen as something necessary. As the American military got more involved in Asian Pacific region, the hypersexualization of Asian women took its root within America's soldier, as they synonymized Asian women's bodies with pleasure and gratification. For example, after World War II, American soldiers took control of the Japanese-controlled brothel of Comfort Women in Korea. And in 1940s, camp towns were built near the U.S. military bases, specifically to please its soldiers with licensed sex workers, dancers, bar girls, etc. In 1965, 85% of GI surveyed reporting having been with or having been out with a prostitute. According to Tim Shoroff, a Washington-based journalism, these camp towns, such as monkey houses, were virtual prisons for sex workers.
When American troops came home with their wartime, they brought back the strong perception of Asian women as submissive and sexually available. Popular media portrayals such as Madame Butterfly and Miss Saigon further cemented the image of lotus flower and dragon ladies. During this time, sexual stereotypes became so strong that Asian women carried a narrative of being a moral contagion. Yeah, moral contagion, exactly what it sounds like. They believe Asian polluted the morals of men by being distracting. Sound familiar? Although society has progressed, many things stay the same, only reinvented. Mass media such as Hollywood and of course our favorite porn continue such narratives and stereotypes to a significant extent. It's really sad how we can so easily picture a teary-eyed poor Asian woman waiting for her white lover to come home from America, or an evil but beautiful Asian woman weaponizing her sexuality to generate a capable protagonist even today.
In connection to the hypersexualization of Asian women, Asians overall were constantly blamed for disease and also seen as a threat for American democracy. And yes, it's a repetitive cycle. In fact, there's even a term for it. It's called the yellow peril. In the yellow peril rhetoric, Asians have been blamed for many diseases: the bubonic plague, cholera, smallpox, syphilis, and you know it, sexually transmitted disease. If you're a millennial or older, you probably remember the 2003 SARS and the 2009 H1N1 influenza, also called the swine flu at times. The act of blaming and ostracizing Asian people to a disease may seem like a new thing, but you've actually been living through a history of it.
For instance, take a look at the similarities between SARS and COVID-19. When the SARS virus began to escalate in severity, Asian bodies were instantly linked to disease and were perceived as carriers. Instead of fighting SARS by washing their hands, which is actually the countermeasure, which is the same thing for COVID-19, people began to react in prejudiced and discriminatory ways towards Asians. People began to refuse to sit next to Asian people at buses, establishments refused to serve Asian customers, Asian businesses began to lose money and support from the shoppers, and other acts of stigmatization and hate pervaded the AAPI community. Research that looked at the SARS epidemic in America indicates that when breakouts of disease occur, fear is commonly connected within the general public, especially when potential death and sickness are significant. When fear takes a hold of people, individuals that are connected to the specific disease face the brunt of people's distress and bias. As stated time and time again, what is happening with COVID-19 now towards Asian Americans is not a distinct event, but another pattern of violence and hate towards the AAPI community throughout history.
Asians and Asian Americans in the US have always been viewed through a certain viewpoint in society. Through a white dominant lens, narratives and concepts like perpetual foreigner, model minority myth, and stereotypes like Asians being cold but competent, etc., culminate together to dehumanize this specific racial group. For instance, the perpetual foreigner, stated by Douglas and Banerjee, is a position where AAPI individuals are seen as outsiders in society. Asian Americans and Asians might feel like they're living a dual identity in a sort of a way, since they're always aware of the fact that they're considered other to everyone else. Kind of like the concept of double consciousness by Du Bois with African Americans. With the perpetual foreigner, individuals may feel alienated in their own skin and experience internal conflict within themselves. A study showed that Asian Americans reported a lower sense of belonging, decreased hope, and reduced life satisfaction when the awareness of perpetual foreigner was known.
On another hand, the model minority myth has been a concept has been used towards Asian Americans since the end of World War II, when William Peterson coined the term first towards Japanese Americans. The concept basically states that Asian Americans are seen as intelligent, successful, hardworking, unobedient in the US. And while this may look nice on the surface, the model minority myth has always been used to demean other minority groups like Black people as a tool to absolve white supremacy and racism. And towards Asians, it places them in one-dimensional boxes that force them to follow the narrative everyone gives them or face ostracization. When Asian Americans feel like they are outliers and inferiors due to falling short of people's expectations, this is called the achievement paradox. And a lot of people don't realize this, but when the Immigration Nationality Act of 1965 was first enacted and it opened up doors for immigration, as a result, like Asians flooded into America, they really sought out the people that got into America during that time were highly educated Asian immigrants. So the assumptions was already kind of faulty in terms of assuming that Asians were smart to begin with because of the immigration practices back then. As a result, most Asian ethnic groups never really learned to speak out and often feel trapped in their own identity and motivation.
Period.
Yeah, and like mental health concerns such as suicide, depression, and anxiety have always been linked to the model minority myth. Overall, when your voice is robbed from you, how can you feel empowered to fight off prejudice and hate? Ain't that?
Susan Fiske, a psychologist at Princeton University, and her partners analyze and examine stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination through a warmth and competence model. People usually categorize people in warm, like are they friendly, are they warm, and competent, are they reliable and smart lenses. For example, Asians are viewed as cold but competent, while middle-class Americans are seen as warm and competent. Individuals who are highly biased and belong in the dominant group of society may react towards the minority groups seen as cold and competent, and prejudiced and harmful behaviors. Concerning how Asian Americans are connected to COVID-19 as viruses and threats, people's reaction may be affected. Racial minority groups that are seen as cold and competent in times of crisis and unstableness are scapegoated by dominant group due to jealousy and discontent. As a result, hate crimes towards Asian Americans continue to surge and spike in hostility and severity.
In society, Asian Americans are used as a wedge between whites and other racial minority groups. So it's kind of like this.
A triangle.
Yeah, that's why it's called triangulation. So coined by Claire Jean Kim, racial triangulation explains how positive aspects like hard work, family, education, success are connected and valued to the AAPI community. But at the same time, the AAPI community in society is also viewed as an outsider, kind of again going back to the question of foreigner, which will never assimilate towards dominant culture in society. In this triangular pattern, Asians are stuck in a tricky and specific place where society has used them as a tool to lower other minority groups, while at the same time being left out by the dominant group as well. So they're really in like this really sticky kind of wedge place.
As we've said before, AIPI community is living in a society where ideas like model minority myth, perpetual foreigner, and Asian stereotypes, etc. are abundant and pervasive. They possess power, and with this power, Asian Americans and Asians can feel shame and inferiority towards their own identity. The concept is known as internalized oppression. With internalized oppression, behaviors and thoughts connected to the skewed racial beliefs and inequality are reinvented within an individual. A person becomes their own limiter towards their own wants and identity in a society that sees them as a standard Asian. All of these things can influence the repeated cycle of how Asians and Asian Americans are seen as a target for America in times of instability and distress. These factors can influence the dehumanization of AAPI community when the voices of many are repressed. In times where Asian Americans are beaten, yelled at, harassed, and ignored for their struggles and pain, we must remember that it's not a one-time occurrence. It's a pattern, and it's a pattern that we need to pay attention to.
Asians are not a monolith, and I'll say it again, Asians are not a monolith. Asian Americans comprise a large array of cultural backgrounds and history. And to be exact, about 23 million Asian Americans can follow their homeland to more than 20 countries in Asia. So not all Asians are the same. While on the surface, Asians seem to be high in high SES, but if you break down the racial groups by ethnicity, you can see there's a difference in numbers, such as Burmese Americans having a median household income of $44,400, and 25% of Mongolians live in poverty during 2019. Furthermore, Asian Americans consist of 14% of the 10.5 million undocumented immigrants in America during 2017. So really, it's not the same. And on another note, language can also vary as well if you're US-born Asian or if you're an immigrant here from Asia. So US-born Asians tend to have a tendency to speak English at home, while Asian immigrants are prone to using their dialects or language like Sue and I. So overall, the narrative that Asians are the same is just not true. We all are different, and we all have stories to tell.
In the midst and racialization of COVID-19, Asians were not only physically and mentally influenced, but also financially damaged. Unemployment rates soared from 2.5% to 13.8%, which is like a 550% increase from February to June in 2019. That's only like 4 months. The graph shows the difference in long-term unemployment from quarter 4 of 2019 to quarter 4 of 2020. Even considering COVID, the spiking of the unemployment rate, Asian Americans definitely have suffered a significant change, evident connection to the discrimination within the workforce.
In Asian-owned businesses, there was a visible fallout of cold customers and an increase in vandalism. Especially in Chinatown, many businesses had to shut down due to lack of customers. An example of xenophobic vandalism is when Mike Wen's Noodle Tree Ramen restaurant was graffitied in red spray paint after he commented on Texas lifting off their mask mandate. The graffiti read racial slogans like "Kung Fu Virus," "Ramen Noodle Flu," "Go Back to China," and "I Hope You Die." It is. With the increased rate of discrimination, plummeting business and attacks, Asian Americans' mental health plummeted. According to the research from the Pew Research Center, a third of Asian Americans feared they might get threats or physical attacks. Some Asian Americans have spoken out about feeling worried about going to the grocery store and their parents being attacked. And I personally feel like this too, concerning what's going on right now. Every single time I go out, I'm always worried about myself and my friends who also by Asian Americans and my family when it comes to the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes.
Right. I feel the same about my parents and them going to work. Every time they go to work, I'm like, I hope that they come back safe. They don't hear some racist quotes. And myself, whenever I go out, I feel conscious to go out alone. And in addition to COVID-19, it's like a restriction that is placed on Asian Americans.
The AAPI community has been severely hit with COVID-19. The violence and hate must stop. We as a society must do better to listen and act in compassion, kindness, and respect, not just to the Asian community, but to everyone. As a collective, we need to be more aware and conscious of our own thoughts and beliefs. So learn, get out there and grow, because change does not happen if we do not move and act.
But there is hope. People are good. When Wen's restaurants was vandalized, Good Samaritans helped him erase the graffitis. Organizations such as Welcome to Chinatown are being created and taking initiatives to help Asian Americans in its businesses.
And also, the perfect opportunity is right now. While May is Mental Health Awareness Month, it's also Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month as well. So try to educate yourself to the history of Asian and Asian Americans in the US. Go support local businesses and establishments that are owned by Asians. And you can do this by simply donating to the organizations listed below, eating or purchasing goods from Asian-owned businesses, or just talking about it. Watch watch entertainment and media that is produced by Asian creators. Basically, as Suna and I have said, it's to be aware and to be engaged in whatever you do.
We believe in the role of activism and advocacy to make a change. That's why we have provided you a list of sources to donate to and organizations to support that are raising awareness of anti-Asian hate and crimes. We are also including a document by Stop AAPI that provides valuable safety advice when you are experiencing hate or you encounter a hate crime. So please check that out.
So that concludes it. So we hope you guys enjoyed the last episode of Dawning Star. Sue and I have had a blast working on this podcast, so we hope you all gained something from it. I mean, we certainly did.
Oh yeah, all that researching.
Woo!
Definitely did.
Yeah.
So really, bye guys. Please keep supporting Alpas Uhwa Stories of Life. The project will end on May 25th. We have merches, we have a donation page that will display your name or be anonymous. That's a page. So thank you so much and see you guys later.
Bye.